There may come a moment in everyone's life when an unsettling premonition arises in a relationship. A gaze once filled with tenderness now avoids contact, and conversations, previously light and casual, become reserved and distant. Inevitably, the question arises, what has changed? If you've ever felt that a loved one is emotionally distancing themselves, know that it doesn't happen suddenly. Feelings fade gradually, imperceptibly like morning mist dissipating with the sunrise. And when the realization of the change comes, it's often too late. But what if there were signs to recognize the impending storm in time? What if it were possible to sense the moment when love begins to fade, even before the relationship comes to its logical conclusion? As Carl Jung once noted, until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. In other words, what remains unnoticed or ignored shapes reality. In the realm of love, this is especially pronounced. The first signs of emotional detachment often go unnoticed, suppressed, in the hope of the best. However, feelings do not disappear without a trace. They recede, transforming into something else. And when this happens, 3 typical patterns of behavior can be identified, which serve as harbingers of impending change. What are these patterns? What lies behind these subtle signs that may foreshadow the end of a close relationship? The answers to these questions may hold the key to understanding what is happening and, perhaps, to saving what can still be saved. Think back to the person who once made your heart flutter with excitement, who gave you the feeling of being understood, desired, and valued. And now, transport yourself to the moment when everything subtly changed. Perhaps it manifested in a barely noticeable withdrawal. Messages that used to receive instant replies suddenly lingered for hours or even days. The gaze, once filled with radiance, dimmed, conversations became formal, and meetings became routine. It seemed that physical presence remained, but the soul was already hovering somewhere in another dimension. What happened? Why did love begin to slip away, like sand through your fingers? According to Buddhist philosophy, impermanence is a fundamental law of existence. Nothing remains eternal and unchanging. Even feelings, even the strongest and deepest, are subject to transformation. Love can transform, fade, and even disappear. But when love begins to change, how do you know if there is still a spark of hope? How do you recognize the first signs that a person has internally distanced themselves, even if they are still present? The key to the answer lies in the quiet, almost imperceptible changes in behavior that invariably manifest when love begins to wither. Like a small bird that finds shelter on a branch, announcing its presence with melodious trills, building a cozy nest and staying until it senses danger, love behaves similarly. As soon as it senses dislike or discomfort, it will not protest or make a scene, but simply quietly and imperceptibly flutter away. This is exactly what happens with this sublime feeling. Before finally disappearing from our lives, it gradually recedes, first on an emotional level and then physically. The first harbingers of impending change are subtle changes in the partner's behavior. Responses to messages lose their warmth and sincerity, turning into formal replies dictated by a sense of duty. Once deep and meaningful conversations are replaced by superficial talk, punctuated by oppressive silence, and even when present, the person seems absent, their thoughts and feelings somewhere far away. At this moment, a painful struggle ensues in the soul. Am I exaggerating? Maybe it's just temporary difficulties. However, it is precisely these doubts and indecision that can lead to the most dire consequences. The longer we ignore the warning signs, the greater the distance between partners. The renowned psychologist Carl Jung often spoke of the shadow, the hidden aspects of our personality that we suppress into the subconscious, but which continue to influence our lives. Similarly, love often fades, not suddenly, but gradually, due to the growing shadow of unspoken grievances, unresolved conflicts, and suppressed disappointments. These negative emotions, like cracks in the foundation, create a chasm between loving hearts. And if we do not find the courage to openly talk about our feelings and problems, this chasm will sooner or later become insurmountable. Love does not fade overnight like a deafening explosion. Rather, it leaves us imperceptibly, like a barely audible whisper. And then the pressing question arises, what to do when you feel that a loved one is distancing themselves? This is perhaps the most agonizing moment, because when we feel love slipping through our fingers, we instinctively try to hold on to it, to revive in the other person's memory all the moments and feelings we've shared. But what if I told you that this is the fatal mistake? Love cannot be forcibly retained. A hero in one story learned this simple truth while watching a small bird perched on a branch. As soon as he made a sudden movement, trying to get closer, the bird, startled by his impulse, immediately fluttered and flew away. This is the main lesson. The more desperately you try to chase after fading love, the faster it will disappear from your life. The realization that we are being abandoned causes unbearable pain. But it is even harder to accept that the person who once had tender feelings for us may not even realize that they no longer love us. They may remain physically present, but their soul has already gone in a different direction, and this is impossible not to feel. However, there is something that remains behind the scenes. When love begins to fade, two other important events invariably occur. And if you turn a blind eye to them, you can only prolong your own suffering. Have you ever had the feeling that when you look into the eyes of a loved one, you suddenly realize that something has subtly changed? Familiar facial features, the usual timbre of voice, everything seems the same, but at the same time there is a gaping emptiness, as if something important and essential has disappeared. Perhaps it's the changed look, or rather the lack of former warmth and interest. Previously, every word of this person was a valuable revelation, a confidential secret that you wanted to share only with your closest confidant. Now, their speech has turned into indistinguishable background noise that does not linger in your mind. In such moments, a painful realization comes: this person is no longer who they used to be. When love begins to lose its strength, one of the first and most noticeable signs is detachment. The person is physically present, but their soul, their thoughts and feelings are already far away. The body remains, but the inner world drifts away, creating a chasm between two hearts. However, there is something even more agonizing. When love leaves, it does not simply disappear without a trace, but undergoes a transformation, often painful and unpleasant. As Jung said, everything we deny in ourselves ultimately gains power over us. And in relationships, we often turn a blind eye to the obvious things, to what is happening right in front of our noses, afraid to admit the bitter truth. Another phenomenon that accompanies the fading of love is an almost complete transformation of personality, and this is a natural process. Let's recall the union of two people bound by years of shared experiences. At the beginning of their journey, there is a sense of unbreakable unity, as if they have the gift of unerringly understanding each other's state of mind. However, over time, this deep connection gradually weakens. Petty grievances and misunderstandings are hushed up more and more often, and for longer periods. Laughter loses its sincerity, turning into a formality. And at some point, the realization comes that the person who once made the world seem unexplored and beautiful has undergone irreversible changes. Love is an integral part of our identity. When two people have deep feelings for each other, their inner worlds intertwine, and their thoughts, habits, and even manner of speaking begin to reflect each other. But when love evaporates, this unity collapses. A person has to redefine their identity without the presence of a partner. That is why their behavior undergoes changes. That is why it seems that you are facing a completely different person, and therefore conversations that once flowed freely and easily become strained and unnatural, as if it were just a polite conversation between courteous acquaintances trying to maintain a superficial dialogue. Consider the story of a couple whose relationship for many years was filled with shared adventures, confidential conversations, fun, and moments of quiet intimacy. However, over time, changes occurred in their union. The man began to notice that jokes that previously caused his companion to laugh sincerely, now found no response. Minor disagreements turned into an atmosphere of coldness and alienation. And then one day, the woman who once had deep feelings for him suddenly realizes that her beloved has changed. He feels that love has faded, but an even more alarming discovery is that his chosen one has also been transformed. Musical pieces that they once listened to together no longer arouse her former interest. Words that could previously comfort him now sound meaningless. Joint plans that they had been building for years suddenly lost their significance. At this moment, the realization comes that not only love has disappeared, but also the person who was once there. Many people don't realize that when someone leaves our lives, they don't simply disappear, but transform into someone we no longer recognize. This metamorphosis is particularly painful, as it forces us to confront a bitter truth. We were once one with this person, but now that unity is shattered. Then comes the question that causes the most pain. Where is the person who once loved me? The answer is simple and cruel. They are no longer there. They have become different because the love that once bound you is no longer a part of their existence. But does this mean that they never had genuine feelings? Not at all. It only demonstrates that love is changeable and inconstant. Many experiencing a breakup make a common mistake, striving to return the relationship to its former state. However, is it possible to recreate the past with someone who has already undergone changes? In attempts to resurrect a past connection, people often indulge in memories of happy moments. They revisit old photos, relive correspondence, listen to music that once served as the soundtrack to their love, hoping to find at least a spark of former feelings. However, the reality is that it is impossible to breathe life into what is gone. Love is like a river flowing its course. Attempts to stop it are like trying to hold water in your hands. The harder you squeeze, the faster it flows away. The logical question arises, how to move on when a loved one has changed? The key to solving this problem lies in the wise advice given by Jung, the ability to let go of what no longer belongs to us. To let go is not to forget. It doesn't mean erasing memories. To let go means acknowledging that the love that once existed played its role in life. Accepting this fact helps to stop fighting reality and find long-awaited peace. But humanity faces an even more complex task, how to heal emotional wounds and recover after a devastating loss. This question is not simple, but there is a way out of this situation. The renowned psychologist Carl Jung developed a unique method that allows one to recognize and accept the inevitable changes that occur in everyone's life. He sincerely believed that even amidst the most tragic events and losses, a person is capable of finding inner harmony and peace of mind. It is enough to devote at least a few minutes daily to conscious analysis of one's own feelings and experiences to gradually come to peace. In the following narrative, we will consider the third and final sign that unmistakably indicates the fading of love from a close person. Recognizing this fact is especially difficult because love never disappears suddenly, as if by magic. It doesn't knock on the door to say goodbye, and it doesn't leave a farewell letter explaining the reasons. Love crumbles into tiny fragments, manifesting in subtle gestures and meaningful silences, which over time lead to the formation of an insurmountable gap between people. Previously, two signs indicating the fading of love have already been considered. The first of these is the effect of detached presence, when a person is physically nearby but their soul and thoughts are already far away. The second sign is the transformation of personality, when a loved one turns into a stranger like a foreigner from a distant land. However, there is also a third, the most agonizing sign, which not only states the fact of the disappearance of love, but also deprives hope for its return. Has it ever happened to you that a person who once had tender feelings for you begins to feel uncomfortable in your company? Have you noticed how a once close person bristles as if foreseeing a quarrel, even before you have a chance to utter a word? Another disturbing sign of fading love is growing impatience, irritation, turning into contempt. It's hard to admit, but along with love, condescension also disappears. What once seemed like a cute peculiarity now only causes annoyance. The manner of laughing, speaking, expressing thoughts, everything that once fascinated now seems to violate the boundaries of the common space. It suddenly becomes cramped, and, most sadly, this process lacks logic and rational explanation. Changes occur in leaps and unpredictably, but one thing is certain: you feel it. Impatience manifests itself in small things, in abrupt answers, in averted gazes, in a weary sigh before the start of a conversation, and then one day you ask yourself, what did I do wrong? But the truth is that the changes taking place are not related to your actions, but to the faded feelings of another person. As Friedrich Nietzsche aptly noted, the true antipode of love is not hatred, but icy indifference. As long as at least a spark of love remains in the relationship, even if overshadowed by conflicts and grievances, there is always hope for reconciliation, for finding compromises, for fighting for common happiness. But when love fades, the willingness to make an effort and meet each other halfway also disappears. And then comes the moment when a loving heart faces the most devastating blow. The other person becomes indifferent. This is a truly cruel test because before there was at least some reaction, some emotion, even if negative. But now you can call out, scream, shed tears, and nothing will change. The person who once swore eternal fidelity, who held your hand, looks as if at a stranger. And in that moment comes the realization that the deepest pain of love is not in rejection, but in becoming invisible in the eyes of someone who once saw you as their whole world. But why does this happen? Why does someone who once worshipped you suddenly begin to feel repulsed? The answer may seem painful. When love exhausts itself, being together becomes a heavy burden. The person who used to feel good next to you now feels an overwhelming desire to break free, and this causes them internal discomfort that they cannot always understand and express in words. Then irritation begins to manifest in small things. A touch that was once natural and desirable now seems strained and forced. A conversation that used to flow freely and easily now requires effort and careful consideration of every word. A smile that was once sincere and spontaneous turns into a perfunctory, polite gesture. And if you haven't encountered something like this yet, be vigilant. This is the last stop before the final parting. A turning point arrives. Even when you realize that feelings are fading and try to revive the relationship, you cannot bring back the lost love. It's hard to accept because society instills the idea that love can always be saved, while keeping silent about the fact that not every ending requires a fight. Some separations are inevitable. It's worth asking yourself, if your partner's gaze no longer radiates the same warmth, if the signs are obvious but ignored, if you are fighting for something that is already collapsing, is it worth wasting your energy to maintain feelings alone? Isn't it time to break free and move on? This is a painful stage that requires making a decision that doesn't always coincide with what you want. It's important to stop, take a deep breath, close your eyes, and honestly ask yourself, does this person still love me, or am I clinging to the past? If the answer comes instantly, if your heart already knows the truth, perhaps the real struggle is not in holding on to a fleeting love, but in accepting its demise. In the future, we will address the question of how to get through a breakup, how to let go of lost love without agonizing pain, and how to find peace after the end of a love story. Breaking up with someone dear to your heart never happens instantly. Subtle signs appear in avoiding glances, in unanswered messages. Love leaves unnoticed, gradually, but leaves behind a long-lasting echo. And when you realize that a loved one has distanced themselves, left us not physically but emotionally, then the question inevitably arises, what awaits ahead? How to fill the void that has formed? Often people react to this emotional pain extremely unwisely. They desperately cling to what has already gone into the past, persistently seek attention, demand explanations, strive to return to the previous state. But unfortunately, few people explain that some wounds do not need answers. It is important to allow yourself to feel them, experience them, and then, at the right moment, let them go. And today we will talk about how to let go of lost love without causing yourself additional harm. After all, there is one important nuance that is often overlooked. The end of a relationship can either break you or become a starting point for transformation, and the choice is always yours. Have you ever wondered why the end of romantic relationships is associated with such difficulties? The answer lies in the neurobiological processes that occur in our brain. Scientists from Columbia University conducted a study that revealed a striking similarity between a person's experiences during a breakup and the withdrawal syndrome that occurs with drug addiction. During the period of falling in love, the brain actively produces powerful neurotransmitters such as dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin. This unique combination of chemicals causes a feeling of euphoria, strengthens emotional connection, and creates a sense of security and comfort. However, when a relationship comes to an end, the level of these substances drops sharply, leading to a state comparable to trying to get rid of a heavy addiction. That is why many people continue to stay in relationships that they realize have already exhausted themselves. And for the same reason, they return to their former partners again and again. The reason lies not in the preserved feelings of love, but in the formed addiction. This very dependency becomes a source of pain and suffering, as subconsciously a person only yearns for those minor manifestations of past intimacy that once filled their life. Herein lies a bitter truth that few realize and are willing to admit. Often, we desperately try to save not love itself, but only the version of ourselves that existed in that relationship. But unfortunately, the past is irreversible, and that version will never return. Consequently, a legitimate question arises: how to move forward when love has faded and the connection is broken without dwelling on emotional pain. Psychologists explain this phenomenon using the concept of selective emotional memory. This mechanism explains why, after a breakup, the brain tends to downplay negative memories, while positive ones, on the contrary, become more vivid. Perhaps many have noticed that over time, only the bright moments remain in memory: joyful smiles, a sense of closeness, and shared dreams. But what about the sleepless nights full of tears? What about the conflicts that made you question everything? What about those moments when you subconsciously felt that something was wrong, but ignored it? The brain suppresses these memories because its nature seeks pleasure and avoids suffering. This is why many people return to relationships that have long outlived their purpose, succumbing to the illusion that they can bring back something that was never as perfect as it seems now. And this is a mistake, because if love has disappeared once, it cannot be reborn. Imagine a situation. Is love worth begging for? If a relationship is based only on the fear of being alone, can it be called true love? This question raises a deeper issue. What are we trying to preserve, love itself, or just its illusion? The fear of loneliness is a powerful force that makes us look back on the past. But is loneliness really as terrible as it seems? Studies by scientists at the University of Chicago have revealed that prolonged loneliness has an effect on the body comparable to chronic stress. Cortisol levels rise, immunity weakens, and the risk of depression increases. However, it is important to understand the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is a state when we do not choose to be alone. Solitude, on the other hand, is a conscious choice when one's own company brings confidence and peace. This is why some people become stronger after a breakup, while others sink into emptiness. Those who are not afraid to be alone with themselves discover an important truth. True love is born not from the outside, but from within. This inner love blossoms when we stop begging for the attention of those who have left us. Completing the cycle of love is not just stating the fact of separation, but creating a deep inner ritual that can help to finally let go of the past, both in the soul and in real life. This process includes 3 key stages. First of all, it is necessary to realize that the image of the person you once loved has undergone irreversible changes. A common mistake that keeps us in the shackles of past love is the naive belief that our partner has remained the same. However, love, both creative and destructive, transforms personality, and separation leaves an indelible mark. The person you feel for today is no longer the same person who once gave you happiness. Accepting this harsh truth is the first step towards liberation. It is pointless to look for explanations as they cannot change reality. You can endlessly analyze the past, think about the moments when everything went wrong, but these searches will not bring back lost love. The longer you try to find answers, the longer the emotional pain will last. You should not suppress your feelings, but it is important not to let them completely take over. Sadness, pain, and a sense of emptiness are just transient stages of life. By letting the whole range of emotions pass through you without trying to restrain them, you will gradually feel the heaviness receding, and one day a moment will come when the pain subsides. This will be a signal of liberation from the past. At this moment you will realize that the end of a love story does not mean the end of life. Love is impermanent, it comes and goes, but experience, inner strength, and the ability to love remain with a person forever. In the future, this experience will allow you to love more. Consciously understanding your value and significance. Parting is not a defeat, but an opportunity to discover new facets of your personality, freeing yourself from relationships that no longer define you. True love does not require dissolving into it, but helps you find yourself. Therefore, when experiencing the pain of separation, it is important to remember that this is not the end, but the beginning of a new stage. Sometimes goodbye is necessary not to leave a person in emptiness, but to free up space for something bigger, stronger, and more real. Perhaps the pain still lingers, but each new day offers an opportunity for healing. It's not worth spending time trying to bring back the past. Instead, you should direct your energy toward developing self-love. When a person learns to value themselves, they open the doors to love that doesn't require a struggle to possess it.